Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon to where Kevin lives, just barely afternoon. Would you like to learn from some of the wisest people on the planet? Would you like access to keys of action steps that they might recommend? Would you like to know what it's like to speak with the master mentors on the planet? If you would like to be informed and inspired for the next 30 minutes, I hope that you'll stay right where you are if you're with us live. Welcome to another live episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. If you are here live, please start by saying hello, telling us where you're from in the chat. We'd love for you to do that. And while you're here, just imagine that you're having a cup of coffee with us. Share your questions, your comments, and your ideas. It will make for a better conversation for my guest and I, who I'm going to introduce momentarily, and a better podcast episode as well. And if you aren't here live, you could be for future episodes. You can get access to all future live episodes and therefore interact with us and see them much sooner by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Today's episode is brought to you by Remarkable Masterclasses. Each month, we release a new skill in an advanced masterclass format designed to help you become the remarkable leader and human you were born to be. Details on how to get on board for a specific skill or to get discounts each month can be found at remarkablemasterclass.com. And I'm guessing you already know who my guest is. We're having a little trouble with the Facebook feed, it appears. But I'm guessing you already know who my guest is. His name is Scott Miller. And now I lost my notes. There's the book. We're going to talk about that book, I promise you. Scott is capping off a 25-year career. Whoops, I have the wrong. No, I have what I want. Capping off a 25-year career where he served as the Chief Marketing Officer and Executive Vice President at Franklin Covey. He is now their advisor on thought leadership, leading strategy development, and publication of the firm's best-selling books, including some of his own. He hosts the Franklin Covey-sponsored On Leadership with Scott Miller podcast, authors a leadership column for Inc.com, and hosted the weekly iHeartRadio show, Great Life, Great Career. He's the author of the multi-volume Mess to Success series, including Management Mess to Leadership Success, which he came on here on this podcast and talked to me about, Marketing Mess to Brand Success, and the forthcoming Job Mess to Career Success coming in January. He's the co-author of the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Everyone Deserves a Great Manager, and the author of Master Mentors. He was holding it up a second ago, 30 transformative insights from our greatest business minds. And that's where we'll focus today. Prior to his time at Franklin Covey, he worked with the Disney Development Company, the real estate development branch of the Walt Disney Company, as a founding member of the team that designed the town of Celebration, Florida. He and his wife and children live in Salt Lake City, and he is our guest today. Scott, welcome back. That's a long introduction, my friend.
No, why didn't you cut that down, Kevin?
Well, I did,
but
I should have cut it some more. No, there were a couple things. I mean, I hate to not talk about the books, and that last piece I wanted to get to because I want to come to that in a minute and talk a little bit about the Disney thing prior to the long Franklin Covey thing. So why don't we just start there a little bit? And again, for all of you that are with us, feel free to ask your questions, share your comments along the way. We hope that you will do that. Just tell us a little bit about your journey, sort of what gets you to this place, Scott.
Sure. So born and raised in Orlando, Florida, as you mentioned, I worked for the Walt Disney Company for 4 years. They invited me to leave at the end of that 4 years. So where does a single Catholic boy from Orlando, Florida move? Well, of course, to Provo, Utah, where all the Catholics are. So 26 years ago, I moved out to Utah. Dr. Stephen R. Covey, who was the founder, of course, of the Covey Leadership Center and the author of the seminal book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, recruited me, and I had an amazing career for 26 years now in the firm, from the front line, literally to the C-suite, where I was the chief marketing officer. I'm now privileged to host the world's largest weekly leadership podcast. It's about 7 million people each Tuesday. Like you, I'm privileged to interview amazing guests and authors and celebrities and CEOs, launching a new podcast in January called C-Suite Conversation with Scott Miller. That'll be just interviewing, iconic C-suite leaders aimed at C-suite leaders. Writing a few books here and there, raising 3 sons with my wife in an otherwise tumultuous world, and trying to raise these boys to be gentlemen. That's my number one priority in life, is to launch them well into the storm that is our world. Honored to be back on your podcast, Kevin. Glad to talk about Master Mentors today.
Well, yeah, you're one of only a few that have been on here more than once. And we're going to get into Master Mentors, where you mentioned the podcast, and well, I'll just hold that thought because I want to get back to that. But first, I want to ask you a question. I don't know if you've been asked this before, but you've really sort of worked for two companies that are extraordinarily well thought of, that being Disney and Franklin Covey. Of course, I didn't know that they asked you to leave, but that's a different question. But in all seriousness, I'm curious, kind of what reflections on the two sort of very well-known and well-respected cultures might you share with us? Maybe either a connection between the two or some sort of lesson between that. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I think both of them share a similarity with Ritz-Carlton, which is this concept of ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. I had an amazing experience at Disney. I learned about customer service and treating your clients like a guest. And that same customer service, I think, transferred over to the Franklin Covey company. And so I just learned about never taking your customers for granted, that you don't have a right to exist. You have to re-earn that right every day with your clients. So I think I have been inculcated through 30 years, 3 decades of never taking your business for granted and re-earning it every day and following up and offering apologies and owning your mistakes and owning the problem, right? If a client asks you, where is the restroom, you walk them to the restroom. And if they ask you for a document, you don't pawn it off on your assistant, you own it till it's done. I think both companies, quality brands, reputation was everything. Intellectual property was their most important asset. But really their reputation, I was responsible for, especially at Franklin Covey. I was the EVP of marketing, right? And of thought leadership. So it has served me well in my career. If you're walking in the parks, pick up a piece of garbage, put it in the garbage can. I don't care if you're in a suit or if you're working the ride. I was not an executive at Disney, but I was on the executive track, so to speak. And I didn't work in the parks. I worked in a corporate headquarters in an office building in a tie and a suit. But when you were in the parks, you owned everything, whether you worked in the parks or not, if you had a name tag on. So that was probably, I've never been asked that question before, but that was a similarity amongst both companies, is you have to re-earn your right to exist in every interaction.
And I love that. Everybody, that's reason enough to have been here. We're not going to stop, though. Yeah. We are going to keep going. So this new book is called Master Mentors. And so give us the background of it, and then I'll tell everybody where we're going to head for the next little while.
Sure. So, like you, I'm privileged to host this podcast where every week I'm able to interview some of the biggest names in the world: Matthew McConaughey, General McChrystal, Doris Kearns Goodwin, Seth Godin, Dan Pink, Susan Cain, Liz Wiseman. I get to pick them all. And I have a half an hour to 40-minute conversation with them, like you do, on video and audio. But after the first 100 episodes, Kevin, I realized so much of the insights were shared off camera. Either they dropped a truth bomb in the metaphorical green room before we went live, or we hung up and then had a 4 or 5 minute chat where they said something. I'm thinking, why didn't you share that on the interview? That was amazing. So I partnered with HarperCollins and I wrote a book called Master Mentors, 30 Transformative Insights from Our Greatest Minds. This is not good to great. This is not built to last. This is an easy breezy chicken soup for the leadership soul kind of book. 30 chapters, 30 people, 30 insights. Very episodic, intentionally episodic. In fact, a previous publisher of my previous books passed on it because they thought it was too episodic. I said, yeah, you don't get it. One chapter is around brain health from a neuroscientist, and the next is around introversion. The next is around brand and messaging and leadership. And so it did extremely well. It sold about 50,000 copies in the first 3 months. I'm delighted. And like I said, it's very easy and breezy. I've written out Master Mentors Volume 2 coming out in 2022. And I'll write 10 editions in this book with 30 new mentors every year for the next 8 or 9 years. And it is what it is. It's meant to hit the reader where they are in their journey. Just been promoted, just been demoted. Just divorced, just married, a new parent, have a side hustle.
Yeah, you might only find, and I'm looking at the back cover where
Yes.
all of them are listed, and
Yeah.
about a half a dozen of these folks have been on this show as well. And
Yeah.
and the thing is that you don't even have to read them all. It's to your
You
point, it's
don't.
episodic.
Yeah.
This is worth it for one or two
I
of
think
the
so.
pieces, and that's
Yeah.
I think the key. So that makes it, as I told you in our metaphorical green room, a different kind of book to have a conversation on. And I said I would take some different kind of approaches
Yeah.
today, and I'm going to do that. And I really hope that people find it useful. And maybe in kind of the same way this book is sort of different, this episode of the show is going to be a little different, because you find yourself with this opportunity to be with all these folks, right? To interview all of these people, many of whom I'm guessing that was the first time that you interacted with them. I'm sure not all, but many, I'm sure. And so I really want to know, first of all, inside baseball. My goal is to have multiple questions today that you haven't been asked before. So which of the people that you've talked to so far, it doesn't have to be someone that's in the 30 here, were you
Yes.
most excited about or nervous to talk to?
I've never been asked this question before. Well, one name comes to mind, Elizabeth Smart. Of course, the Utah resident that was kidnapped and raped and sodomized and abused and tortured for months from her captor. She's gone on to become a world-renowned victims' rights advocate. And so I wanted the interview to be respectful of her and not have her relive that horror. She has, talked about it very openly in her books. And so I wanted to make sure that it was a respectful interview. So I took a little bit different approach to it. I started with my questions around her being rescued, not through the
Right.
unspeakable sexual torment that she had been through, to use her words. And it was a lovely interview. There was another gentleman named Zafar Masood. He's the he's the CEO of the Bank of Punjab from Pakistan. He's actually the first mentor in volume 2 coming out. He was on a plane and the plane broke apart in air and he survived a plane crash. 79 people died and he was one amongst 2 survivors. His seat literally fell from the sky, hit a roof, bounced off the roof and hit a car, and he lived to tell this story. It was a harrowing experience. Matthew McConaughey was gracious and sweet and kind and well-spoken and articulate, and not the certain dude I thought he might be. He was so kind to me and on time and ready to go and professional. I think Elizabeth Smart was probably the one that I was maybe the most nervous. I'm not nervous as a person. I've been around celebrities my life. I have earned some, influence myself. But I think I was so in awe to be in her presence from what she has been through and what she has done to give voice to survivors and victims and to help us realize the power of forgiveness in our lives. I'd say Elizabeth Smart, who was not featured. She actually declined to be featured in the book. I was disappointed and surprised, but she declined to be featured. Maybe she'll come back around for a future volume.
So you ask people if they want to be in.
Oh, most definitely. Every one of these people has given me permission. They have read their chapter. They had full editorial control. Many didn't change a single word. Oh, no question. Everybody is fully vetted and is documented on their participation. Yes.
Well, I figured that, but since you mentioned it, I thought I'd ask. So I said that this would be a different kind of
And it is.
of episode. I've already got 2 you haven't been asked before. But I it's interesting. As I was reflecting on how where we would go with this, I was thinking, well, Scott, there's a lot of people that would look to you because of all of the books behind you, because of the work that you've done, it for you as being the mentor. And I'm sure that you've mentored many, but I'm really curious what you've learned as a mentee behind the mic, if you will. Like, what have you learned from hosting the On Leadership podcast? Like what's a lesson? And it's not just like, okay, this is for all of you that want to start a podcast, although it's fine if, people want to learn that. But like, what have you learned from the process of being on the other side of the mic?
A lot. I've learned that people come for the guest, they stay for the host. So you have to find what is your right mix of how often you speak and how often you don't, and how easy it is to take over. And not everybody likes your style, so you have to find your right mix, and you can't respond to every complaint or delight or blog post about you. I've learned about being a better listener, asking bigger, open-ended questions that are perhaps different than everybody else on their podcast as well. I try not to be an investigative reporter, right? I work for a public company. Franklin Covey owns this podcast, and so I'm not a journalist. I'm not an investigative reporter. There's no gotcha questions, right? It's a
I
safe
often
place.
have told guests that, listen, there will be no Mike Wallace questions here.
Yeah,
Right?
right. I could do that. That's not my job. That's not my job. Here's what I've learned, and I had a previous podcast host ask me the same question, and they did not like my answer, but I'm resolute in it, and that is, amongst the 200 guests we've had in this podcast, we tape about 3 or 4 months out, like you, right? Because the demand is big. These are the books that just came in this week, right? To have me interview from agents and publicists. Is that what all these guests have in common is an indefatigable work ethic. These are hard working people. Whether you are a 4-star general or a Pulitzer Prize winning author or a CEO or a celebrity or someone with no celebrity, but you've written something or done something significant, they have an indefatigable work ethic. Whether it's John Gray, Men Are From Mars, or Jack Canfield, Chicken Soup, it sold 500 million copies, or your General McChrystal, 4-star general. These people they outwork everybody. They're no smarter than you or I. Some of them are better educated. Very few of them were raised, with wealth or connection. They just worked their hearts out. And I had a podcast host take great offense at this a few weeks ago. He said, "So you're telling me that if my dad would have just worked harder, he could have earned more money selling vegetables from the back of his truck?" He took me to task. And I said, I can't speak to your father's ingenuity or your father's marketing plan or how many, I don't know that. What I'm telling you is my insight across all 200 guests is they outwork everybody. They're not workaholics. They understand there's seasons in life, right? There's seasons of balance and imbalance. But on the average, these people are super passionate about what they do, and they outwork everybody. John Maxwell will be on 8 podcasts a day. John Maxwell has more money than you know who. Does not need any more promotion. But it's something I've taken to heart is, as a father and as a husband and as, a guy that, could die any day. We've proven that the last 20 months. Life is short. I want to make sure that I'm out there hustling and working hard and showing up. And so I'll tell you what I've learned from being the podcast host: how to talk less, how to listen more, but also that I think the key differentiator in life is hustle, chutzpah, work ethic. There's other key differentiators: work smarter, not harder. I get it, but that's what I see common in nearly everybody on the podcast and in the book.
So let me pause for all of you listening and notice what Scott didn't say. He didn't say, man, they're all busy. He said they all work hard. I think there's a big difference. We've got an epidemic of busy in our world right now. We don't need to have that conversation, but I think there's a big difference between activity and accomplishment. And these are folks that are working hard, clear about what they want to accomplish and going after it. And we can go right down the list, right? I think that's really great.
Remarkably clear, right? They're like Seth Godin is a good friend of mine. He's an iconoclast. I mean, he's very clear about what he does and does not do, what he will and will not do. Because the podcast has become so substantial, most people now will come onto it. But you're exactly right. These people are not lost in business or activity. They're extremely clear on what it is they want to accomplish. By the way, they also all have an abundance mentality. It's not a scarce thought in their lives. They want to give back. They want to lift up. They want to share their ideas and their mistakes and their failures. But you're absolutely right, Kevin, is they're extraordinarily focused and hardworking on their top priorities. There's a lot to be learned from that.
Yeah, I think that's true. So there are 30 of sort of these varietal ideas and thoughts and lessons from the book. And we were talking with Scott Jeffrey Miller about Master Mentors. I'll get this back so maybe you can see it if you're watching. 30 transformative insights from our greatest minds. So if you were to pick one of them
Yes.
maybe that you feel led to
Yeah.
talk about today? One
Yeah.
lesson
Yeah.
to share, to give people an example.
It would be the first person. His name is Nick Vujicic. By the way, whenever I speak publicly, I always have a card deck, right? That I don't use PowerPoint. So if anybody ever hires me for a keynote, they're going to get these cards that come in a little sleeve. Nick Vujicic is a very famous author, inspirational speaker, podcaster. He is Australian by birth, American by choice. He was born with no arms and no legs. He has no limbs. He has a neck and a head and a torso like you and I. But Nick Vujicic cannot do anything for himself other than control his mindset. He cannot drink, scratch his head. He cannot walk. He cannot save himself from a fire. He cannot do anything because he has no limbs. He has a waist and a tiny little foot appendage that he can kind of text with, but that's it. And Nick and I become very dear friends. Nick has taught me, and I write about it in the book as the opening chapter, about the power of gratitude. Is being grateful for what you have and not envious of what you don't. Is wanting what you have, and even being grateful for what you don't have. And he really ignited in me at the age of 52. I'm 53 now. When I wrote this book a year ago, I never really understood the power of gratitude, about being able to take a drink of water, being able to put your eyeglasses on, being able to scratch your head when it itches. Nick can't do any of this. And Nick brought to life in me this idea of living your life, Kevin, through the lens of I have to, or I ought to, or I get to. And it's since having Nick at my house for dinner that I live my life every day. I get to take out the garbage at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night in December in Utah when it's 10 degrees outside. I get to drive my boys to different schools every morning. I get to rake the yard. I get to have a high courage conversation with someone that needs to change their behavior. I get to terminate someone because it's not working and they need to be sent out to find their passion somewhere else. I live my life since meeting Nick, not through I have to or I ought to, but I get to get up at 2 a.m. and deliver a keynote speech to Oman or Qatar, right? Through Microsoft Teams that I don't love, or I don't get to see anybody. And so it has transformed I get to get the virus and be down, or not the virus. I get to get the vaccine and recover from it for 36 hours. So it has been transformative, and hopefully each of those 30 transformational insights have that same level of nuance. And I think it was Dr. Covey that said, to know but not to do is not to know. And Voltaire said, I think, common knowledge isn't always common practice.
Yep.
And so I think the book Master Mentors builds on this idea that I shared about Nick Vujicic around, and everything you do, look at it through the lens of I get to, and you'll have a transformational insight probably for each of the 30 chapters, quite frankly.
So there are people listening, maybe watching or listening, and I know what I'm channeling them. I know what some of them are thinking. They're thinking, well, it's awesome if you're Scott and you get to talk to all these amazing people, but I can't talk to those people. And I can't have mentors like that. And so my question for you is, what is your advice to people about finding a mentor? And maybe even any comment you want to make to what I'm just channeling that some are thinking. Like, what is your advice or counsel around finding mentors?
I haven't met most of my mentors. I've never met Larry King or Tony Robbins. I can go on and on. I mean, I've not met most of my mentors. I've seen these people from stage. I've watched them on television or read their books or read all their books. So I don't think you have to be in physical proximity to have a mentor or to be a mentor. I'm going to guess there's a person out there that's not met me, that's chosen to have me be their mentor through my books or podcast or lessons otherwise. So one is, don't think you have to know your person or ask their permission to have them mentor you. Long before I started this podcast, I had many mentors. Now, I also have mentors that I have lunch with, or I'm mentoring someone that I have a Zoom call with every Wednesday morning at 5 a.m. because they're on the East Coast in Nashville or the Central Time Zone. So I think the big idea about being a mentor is, as a mentor, know the difference between being smart and being wise. And when you're a wise mentor, you don't try to turn your mentee into your mini-me. You don't try to turn them into a junior version of you, right? You understand what is it they're trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? And are there some lessons from your own journey, mistakes, successes, failures that you could teach them that would help them on their journey? Resist the temptation to say, well, if I were doing it this, or here's what I would do. Mentors tend to ask really broad questions. So if you did that, what would happen? If you did this, what would happen? Here's some paths. Let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses around each of them. I think when you're selecting a mentor, it doesn't have to always be someone who's done what you're trying to do, right? I might be trying to open up a flower shop, but I might choose to interview a baker or a banker to learn about different things. So
Right.
The first path to selecting a mentor is getting clear on what it is you want to accomplish. Then who could help you do that? Who could teach you lessons from their own journey? Mentorship doesn't mean you have a friendship. Mentorship doesn't mean that you open up your Rolodex to them or you fund their launch. It just means that you're able to share your wisdom that can help them ignite their genius on their journey. I'm writing a book about this for HarperCollins about mentorship, by the way, because I think it's often confused with a coach or, a networker or that kind of stuff as well. We've all got mentors in our lives. You may just not have named it that.
That's fair. And so I want to make an observation about a thread that's running through this entire episode, and that's this idea of clarity. Because what you just said, I think is really important. When we're clear about what we're looking for from the mentor, by the way, you'll have a better chance of getting it. And secondly, if you're not knowing how to ask or what to ask or will they say yes, I guarantee you, as one who gets those requests, that if someone comes to you with greater clarity about why you
Yes.
and what they're looking
Yes.
for, the chances of you getting a yes goes up 150% at least.
If someone calls me and says, I'm in the midst of writing a book and I need some advice on this, could you give me 30 minutes? Of course. But if they want to have 30 minutes every Thursday for 9 months on a brain, I just don't have time for that, right? And I also make sure I set some boundaries. I can mentor you for 4 weeks for 30 minutes at a time on some very specific issues. And if they don't set the parameters, I do, right? Please don't ask me for introductions. Please don't ask me for funding. Please, and then I'll listen very carefully. And if I like this person and they're hardworking and they're smart and they're grateful and they are doing the work that we agree upon, then I might choose to change the boundaries based on me meeting them over time, right?
Totally different then, right?
Yeah. And as a mentee, don't ask your mentor to do things outside of what they should be doing either. It puts them in a very uncomfortable position.
Very difficult spot, for sure. For sure. I love that. I appreciate that. So, we're on a podcast talking about mentoring, and we're talking about all these super smart people, among the greatest minds, as the subtitle of the book says. And so I would be remiss for us not to talk about giving people some advice, because you've been on both sides of this podcasting mic. What's your advice to people about consuming or listening to or taking value from podcasts like yours or like this one?
That's a great question. I have several answers. I'm Rolodexing which one I want to share. I would say have an open mind. I interviewed a woman, Maria Konnikova, who was a journalist that became a poker champion, like a world-class poker champion by accident. I don't play poker. I don't care about poker. I don't care about gambling. And I learned so much of her about body language, decision-making, negotiation. I went into it with an open mind, even though I didn't care about the topic per se. And so there's so much to learn, is there not, from people that are dissimilar to us, that have different interests than us. And I always am thinking, how can I put that into my life? How can I learn from that in my life? So I'm sure this isn't an epiphany, but I would just say, keep your mind open. And if I listen to a podcast on Six Sigma, which I don't care about, or lean manufacturing, which I don't care about, I'm sure there are insights I can learn to apply in my business and in my own journey. Curiosity is probably the competency I look for the most when I'm hiring people. Do you have a curious mind? Do you have an insatiable interest in learning from others, other cultures and religions and generations and sexual orientations and races and you name it, right? Do you have an insatiable, I mean, you have to agree. Doesn't mean you have to change your mind. It just means that you're open to other people's perspectives.
Well, when we see other people's perspectives, we see things differently. It doesn't mean we have to change our mind, but we see something so much more powerful when our perspective is broadened. What's the question, Scott, that I didn't ask that you wish I would have?
Where to wire me your $1 million fee? I don't know. I'm kidding. No, it was lovely.
Well, I'm going to give that to you after we're done. After we end the broadcast, I'll send that.
None at all. It's been a delightful conversation, actually. I was not so arrogant to think you would ask any particular questions. I'm delighted about it.
Shifting gears, you've mentioned your family several times, and I know that that's an important part of your life because of not only what you've said in the book and what you said here, but what you said to me before we started. Related to the rest of your life, besides all of this writing and all of that work, what do you do for fun?
You know what? I enjoy going to church. I'm Catholic, and it's a big part of who I am, so I enjoy taking my boys to church. I enjoy playing tennis and snow skiing. I love champagne. I love bread, cheese, butter. I love to read. I'm a voracious reader. I don't love being a parent. I don't find it fun at all, actually. I never wanted to be a parent.
You don't love being a parent. By the way, I have never had someone on here tell me when I ask them what they do for fun, and I ask everybody that. I've never had someone say, I love champagne, bread, and butter. Just say I do. Love that.
And cheese. I love it.
I gotta add bacon. Sorry, gotta add
I love bacon. I love bacon. Had some this morning. Thanks for asking.
Okay, you mentioned reading. The only other question I ask everybody is this one: what are you reading right now?
I'm reading 3. I'm reading 4. I'm interviewing Joe Navarro tomorrow, FBI expert on body language, called Be Exceptional. I'm reading The Body Keeps the Score. I'm interviewing him next week. I am interviewing Will Smith on his new book called Will, #1 this week. I'm interviewing Katie Couric. So I'm reading Going There. So right now, these 4 books, look at the size of these books. These 4 books need to be finished by next Monday. So I've got 7 days to get these done.
You are preaching to the choir, sir, because I got the same scenario. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And I can't read every word. I try my best, right? I try my best to read it cover to cover. Will Smith's book is extraordinary. Katie Couric's book is fascinating. So I'm looking forward to interviewing both of them. And I'll tell you, I host a leadership podcast, but there are so many leadership lessons to learn from Katie Couric and Will Smith and from Bessel van der Kolk, the guy who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, right? So there are leadership lessons to be learned from everyone's life.
Well, as I have long said, we become a better leader as we become a better human, and vice versa, for sure. So where do you want to point people? Where can people want to be connected with you?
Yeah.
Where can they find the podcast? Where do you want to point people? I'll hold the book up one more time.
LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, you name it. You can visit scottjeffreymiller.com. All my books are on all independent bookstores, Amazon, BookPal, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. This new book, Master Mentors, just came out. Easy breezy read. Master Mentors Volume 2 will be coming out in September of 2022. 30 new insights, 30 new Master Mentors. And I'm deep now into writing Master Mentors Volume 3 coming out in 2023.
Beautiful. So now everybody have a question. Before we go and before we let Scott go, I have a question for all of you. I'm done asking Scott questions. I have a question for you. Now what? The question is, what are you going to do with this? Maybe you got a lesson here about getting more clear. Maybe you got a new mindset around I get to do something. Maybe the lesson for you is around something said early about I need to ask more, listen better, talk less. Or maybe it's taking a new look at how hard you're working on the most important things. I don't know what it is for you. Those are just meant to be some suggestions based on what I wrote down for me. My challenge to you, though, is to take some action from this, because whether you're listening to On Leadership with Scott Miller, whether you're listening to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, whether you're listening to anything, taking any training, none of it matters until you take some action. And we hope that you will do exactly that. Scott, thanks so much for being here. It was such a pleasure to have you back again.
Kevin, thank you for the platform and the spotlight. I appreciate your abundance mentality, truly.
And everybody, we'll be back again next week. You know that, right? With another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.